Sam Wallace, 62 years old, had long since stopped expecting anything from the sky. Once, in another life, it had promised adventure. His teenage dreams had been filled with fighter jets, cockpit gauges, and streaks of cloud behind screaming engines. But life had its own rules. His father's sudden collapse one winter left him standing in the middle of the family farm with calloused hands and a letter of withdrawal from pilot training folded in his back pocket. That was 4 decades ago. He never married again after Grace died. She had been the only one who could soften the hard edges of rural isolation. Cancer had taken her quickly, 6 months between diagnosis and final breath, and since then, the farmhouse had grown quieter. He still set the table for 2 sometimes, unconsciously, then cleared the extra plate before his sister Lori noticed. The days passed as if on rails: rise at dawn, check the fields, fuel the biplane, dust the crops, return before dark. Evenings were for tuning the plane's aging engine, or nursing tea in a chipped thermos while reading old aviation manuals, their corners curled like dried leaves. That evening in September began like any other. Clouds massed in the west, thick and bruised with rain. He should have turned back earlier. But the barley needed its final pass, and Sam trusted his instincts more than he trusted forecasts. As he dipped low over the last field, the plane's shadow stretched across golden stalks, long and lean like a finger pointing ahead. Then he saw it, a vehicle stalled near a curve in the back road. The area was rarely traveled, especially in foul weather, and the narrow road was prone to washouts. One figure stood outside, barely visible, arm raised stiffly. Most wouldn't have seen them from above. Most would have flown on. But something about the stance arrested him. He circled once, angling for a closer look. The SUV was stuck in thick mud, its tires half submerged. The figure, a woman, stood by the door, motionless except for that single raised hand. It wasn't desperation, it was stillness. And Sam knew stillness. Stillness didn't shout. It waited. And it meant something was wrong. He banked left, dropped his altitude, and scanned the terrain. A field ran parallel to the road, wide enough but slick with early rain. It was a fool's landing, but the biplane was light and he had landed rougher. He guided the old machine down, tires slipping as the wet grass resisted. For a moment, he thought he'd miscalculated, then the wheels found their grip, and the plane came to a slow, grumbling halt. The woman didn't move at first, as if stunned that someone had actually come. She looked about his age, maybe older, with silver hair plastered to her cheeks and mud on her shoes. A formal coat, something you wouldn't wear unless it mattered, clung to her frame. She had been trying to reach Fort Bridge. Her son was receiving a military commendation that night, something high-level, something she didn't want to miss. Her voice carried the kind of weariness only a parent in motion could wear, soft but filled with urgency. The GPS had failed. No signal. No directions. And now the storm had erased the road behind her. Sam helped her into the cab of his truck, where the old heater whined to life. She clutched a crumpled paper invitation like it was a passport. His boots left tracks on the floorboards, but he didn't care. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. The rain thickened, drumming the roof like distant artillery, making everything outside dissolve into shadow. A few times, the truck fishtailed on the dirt path back to the farm, but Sam kept the wheel steady. Lori met them at the door of the farmhouse, a dish towel in one hand, suspicion in the other. But one look at the woman's soaked clothes and trembling fingers, and the suspicion turned into swift hospitality. They got her out of her wet coat, brought quilts from the linen chest, and put the kettle on. Sam sat quietly as Lori chatted about nothing in particular: weather, road closures, the way the pumpkins were coming in early. Nancy, the woman, didn't say much. She just held the mug with both hands and stared into the steam. She didn't give her last name. Just Nancy. But there was something about her that filled the room. A quiet gravity. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that her being there wasn't just a coincidence, even if it made no sense. Later that night, after Lori had gone to bed and the storm still rattled the windows, Sam stood at the back door, thermos in hand, watching the rain turn the earth to soup. Behind him, Nancy had fallen asleep in the armchair, the invitation still clutched loosely in her hand. Her coat hung by the fire, steaming gently. Her shoes sat nearby, mud caked on the soles. Sam thought about the road, about how easily she could have been missed. About how easily most people are missed. A stalled car, a fading signal, and suddenly you're alone in a storm with no one coming. Except someone did. Not because it was planned. Not because it was expected. Just because it was right. He glanced back at her once more, then turned off the light. The storm had passed by morning, but the sky still wore its bruises. The light was thin, hesitant, like it, too, was deciding whether to commit to the day. Fog rolled low across the fields, softening the edges of the barns and tree lines, and the silence held a certain weight, as though the earth was still listening to what the night had whispered. Sam was up before first light, as he always was. He moved through the motions, coffee, boots, engine check, but something felt different. The plane seemed to sense it too. The old biplane sat in the shed like a retired soldier being asked for one more mission. Its propeller gleamed faintly from last night's polish, and its wings, patched and faithful, waited without question. In the kitchen, Nancy sat at the table with her coat draped over her lap, reading the invitation again as if willing it to offer directions. Her hair, now brushed and neatly pinned, had regained some of its form, but the creases in her brow betrayed her worry. Sam didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply set down a thermos and 2 slices of toast beside her. There was still no cell signal. The roads in and out of Harper County were washed out, and the radio updates warned of further delays. It could be days before things cleared. But the ceremony was at noon. Nancy hadn't asked him for anything. But she didn't have to. Sam told Lori he'd be taking the plane out for a favor. Lori didn't ask questions, she'd seen the look in his eyes. He packed a few tools, some oil, a second thermos, and a military-grade blanket he hadn't unfolded in years. When Nancy stepped outside, her heels sank slightly into the damp earth, so Sam handed her a pair of old boots. She didn't protest. They crossed the field together, the fog parting slightly ahead of them, then closing in behind. The plane roared to life after a moment's hesitation. Nancy climbed in with quiet resolve. Sam helped her buckle in, then tapped the instrument panel once, like a pilot touching the shoulder of an old friend. The wings lifted them smoothly into the morning air. They followed the valley, flying low. Sam didn't trust the upper winds, and besides, the low flight felt right. The fog curled beneath them like ocean mist, hiding the scars of the storm. Trees rose like ships in a gray sea. Below, the world seemed to hold its breath. Nancy didn't speak. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Sam could see the corners of the invitation poking from her coat pocket. The name printed in fine gold lettering, Commander Nathaniel Grant, meant nothing to Sam, but the way she held it did. For 30 years, Sam had flown these same contours, learned every dip and rise of the land like lines on a familiar face. But today he saw it differently. It wasn't his farm, his land, his airstrip. It was a path. A bridge between 2 lives. The radio crackled unexpectedly. Sam reached for the headset. A voice came through, strained and professional. Air traffic control, requesting identification for an unregistered aircraft approaching Fort Bridge's restricted perimeter. Sam responded with his tail number and route, standard procedure. But the tone changed. The voice on the other end grew sharper, more insistent. They were ordered to divert immediately. Fort Bridge was a military base, unauthorized aircraft would be met with force. Sam explained calmly, but the warning repeated. He looked over at Nancy. She reached slowly into her coat and pulled out a laminated pass, military issued, high clearance. She leaned toward the radio and spoke with measured clarity. She gave her full name. Nancy Grant. There was a long pause on the other end. Static filled the moment. Then a different voice broke through. Male. Hoarse. Cracking. The voice called her mom. Sam couldn't hear the rest clearly. But the tone said everything. 2 minutes later, a flash of silver streaked across the left side of the biplane, an F-16, roaring past with impossible speed. A second jet appeared to the right, leveling with them. Then a third, circling once before falling in formation. The biplane, once alone in the morning sky, was now flying in silence beneath a triangle of power. They didn't fire. They didn't force a landing. Instead, they escorted. The valley widened ahead. Fort Bridge came into view, hangars, barracks, the wide apron of concrete runways. Below, a cluster of vehicles began to gather near the edge of a training field. Dust rose from tires. Figures moved. Sam felt his hands tighten on the controls, not from fear, but from awe. The sky around them, moments ago empty, now felt like a ceremony in motion. The jets shifted position, creating a clear corridor. Sam guided the biplane down, wheels touching softly against a cleared strip of grass just beyond the base perimeter. The plane bounced once, then rolled to a gentle stop. As the propellers slowed, Sam saw the rows of uniforms waiting. He hadn't planned for this. But somehow, it seemed the sky had. The biplane rested like a relic beside the towering gray structures of Fort Bridge, its canvas, and would frame a stark contrast to the steel and power surrounding it. As the engine ticked in the silence, cooling from the flight, Sam sat still in the cockpit, his hands resting gently on the yoke. He didn't know if he was supposed to climb out or wait. No one had told him. For a man used to landing in empty fields, it was strange to find a crowd waiting. Uniformed men and women stood in quiet formation at a respectful distance. No commands were shouted, no we*P*NS raised. They weren't here for enforcement. They were here for witness. Nancy had already unbuckled her straps. She moved with the grace of someone returning to a place once deeply known. Sam stepped out and helped her down. When her boots touched the ground, the assembled crowd snapped to attention. No music played, but it felt like a parade. One man broke formation, tall, with the bearing of authority earned through more than just rank. His medals caught the morning light, but it was his face that revealed the moment's weight. He moved quickly, but not with formality. This was not the approach of a commander. This was the stride of a son. He wrapped his arms around Nancy, tightly, as if the storm had not yet passed. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside and looked to Sam. Sam stood awkwardly beside the biplane, unsure of protocol, his flight jacket still smeared with oil and dust. A few feet away, 2 ground crew members stared with something like reverence at the machine he had flown in on. They didn't seem to see a relic. They saw a miracle. A general stepped forward next, broad-shouldered, precise in every movement. He saluted Sam. Then he offered his hand. Not as a superior, but as a man grateful beyond rank. Sam took it, hesitantly. They walked together toward the formation, where the commander, Nancy's son, was to be honored. The original plan had been a simple medal ceremony. What it became was something else entirely. Before the gathered ranks, a podium was moved forward. Nancy was seated beside the other dignitaries. Sam, at first, stood back, trying to disappear into the background. But his name was called. An officer read aloud the report. An unauthorized aircraft had breached Fort Bridge airspace, but had done so carrying the mother of the very man being honored that day. It had landed in a storm. The pilot, civilian, non-military, had risked violation of airspace and weather warnings for no reason other than to make sure a mother saw her son recognized. The story had already spread through the base like fire through dry grass. Photos had been taken. Witnesses shared what they saw. A man had landed in a rain-washed field for a stranger, and in doing so, brought half the Air Force to their feet. When Sam was asked to step forward, he did so slowly, not from fear, but from disbelief. He had lived most of his life beneath notice. He had chosen duty over ambition, quiet over pride. And yet here, surrounded by jets and medals and commanders, he was seen. Nancy's son presented him with a challenge coin, engraved on one side with the insignia of his rescue squadron, on the other, the phrase "No one left behind." A second plaque bore Sam's name. It read simply, "For service beyond duty." Then, for the first time in his life, Sam Wallace received a salute from the entire formation. He didn't know what to do with it. He nodded, half embarrassed, but his throat had closed up. The wind moved gently through the ranks, as if nature itself wanted to be part of the ceremony. Afterward, they let him walk along the airstrip, where jets sat gleaming like thunder held in stillness. One pilot offered to show him the cockpit. Sam touched the controls with reverence. He didn't need to fly it. Just seeing it up close was enough. Later that week, a military helicopter descended on his farmland. Not an emergency, but a gesture. A team arrived with maps and equipment. They had evaluated the way Sam landed in wet conditions and saw potential in his knowledge. A proposal was made. Would he help train pilots in rural landing techniques, emergency descent conditions, and adaptive field judgment? He agreed, but only part-time. The farm still needed him. The airstrip behind his house was soon upgraded: lights, markers, a small weather station. Pilots began visiting for training. The biplane, once a simple tool of crop dusting, was now part of a curriculum. The town took notice. The same people who once saw Sam as just another aging farmer began to speak of him differently. Children pointed to the sky when they saw the plane. Locals stopped to ask about the base visits. Someone repainted the town welcome sign and added a line, "Home of Sam Wallace, Pilot of Honor." But Sam remained unchanged. Each morning, he still drank from the same chipped thermos. He still flew low over his crops. Still mended fences, repaired engines, checked the grain silo. Yet something invisible had shifted. Not just for him, but for everyone around him. Because they'd seen what it looked like when someone chose kindness over convenience. When a stranger helped another, not knowing her name, not asking anything in return. And the sky had answered.